The gathering ended the way most family evenings do, with hugs at the door, leftovers packed into foil, and promises to do this again soon. My husband was cheerful, walking people out, thanking them for coming. Ethan stood near the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking completely at ease, as if the words he whispered to me in the dining room had never existed. If anyone else had looked at him, they'd have seen a man who fit seamlessly into the evening, friendly, attentive, even charming. But for me, every movement, every glance, was loaded. The first sign something was off when the last guests left. My husband began stacking chairs in the corner. I told him I'd handle the rest of the cleanup, hoping for a moment alone to breathe. Ethan lingered. "I'll help her," he offered casually. I froze, but my husband, oblivious, smiled. "Sure, man, thanks." The moment the front door shut and my husband disappeared into the garage to put chairs away, Ethan moved closer. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said, his voice low, almost admiring. "I told you earlier," I said sharply. "Pretend this never happened." He smirked. "Oh, I will for now. But you can't tell me you didn't feel something." It was infuriating, not just his arrogance, but the way he spoke, as if I was somehow complicit in his actions. The mistake he made. He stepped in again, closing the gap between us, and this time his hand brushed my arm. A deliberate, possessive touch. But before I could respond, a sound behind us made my stomach drop. It was my husband's voice. "What's going on in here?" Ethan stepped back instantly, but the damage was done. My husband's eyes flicked between us, reading something in the air. "Nothing," I said quickly, forcing calm into my voice. "We were just," Ethan cut in smoothly, "just talking about how amazing dinner was. You've got a keeper here." It was slick, too slick, but my husband seemed to accept it, at least outwardly. The quiet drive home for Ethan. When it was time for Ethan to leave, my husband offered to walk him out. I watched from the kitchen window as they stood by Ethan's car, talking. I couldn't hear their words, but I could see my husband's expression harden just slightly before he gave Ethan a pat on the back and stepped away. When he came back inside, he didn't mention the conversation, but the way he avoided my eyes told me something had shifted. The shocking message later that night, after my husband had gone to bed, I stayed in the kitchen, sipping water, trying to steady myself. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Ethan, I wasn't wrong about you." My blood ran cold. He'd never texted me before. We'd never exchanged numbers, which meant he'd either gotten it from my husband at some point, or he'd gone through my husband's phone. The impossible choice. I sat there, staring at the message, my mind racing. I could delete it, pretend it never happened. Or I could tell my husband right now, and risk detonating a bomb in his friendship, our marriage, maybe even our entire social circle. But before I could decide, another message came through. "Ethan, I'm staying in town longer than planned. We'll see each other again soon." The confidence in those words wasn't just unsettling. It was chilling. It told me he wasn't worried about boundaries, consequences, or even being caught. The confrontation the next morning, over coffee. I couldn't take the weight of the secret anymore. "There's something I need to tell you," I said, my voice unsteady. My husband set his mug down slowly, his eyes searching mine. "It's about Ethan, isn't it?" The breath caught in my throat. "You knew?" He nodded, his jaw tight. "I saw the way he was looking at you last night. I didn't want to believe it. But when I walked in and saw him standing that close..." "What did you say to him outside?" I asked. "I told him I noticed," my husband said. "And I told him that if he ever disrespected you again, we were done. As friends, as anything." The twist you wouldn't expect. I thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn single quotes T.2 days later. My husband got a call while we were having breakfast. He stepped into the other room to take it, and when he came back, his expression was unreadable. "That was Ethan," he said. "He's moving back here, permanently." I stared at him, speechless. "You can't be serious." "He says he wants a fresh start," my husband continued, avoiding my gaze. "And I told him he could crash at our place for a couple weeks until he finds something." It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. After everything that happened, after the whispers, the touches, the messages, Ethan was going to be living under our roof. And that's when I realized the real story hadn't even begun yet. The hum of conversation was steady, almost comforting, as the family gathering began to wind down. Plates had been cleared, coffee was being poured, and soft background music drifted from the speakers. From the outside, everything seemed perfectly normal, another warm, successful evening surrounded by loved ones. But my body was tense. Ethan's strange attention throughout the night had left me unsettled, my nerves stretched thin. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into casual gestures, into glances that could be explained away. Still, I stayed alert, my senses quietly tuned to his presence. The opportunity, it happened when I went into the dining room to gather the last few dishes. Most of the family had moved into the living room, and my husband was busy telling a story to his cousins. I thought I had a moment to breathe, to step away from the noise and just collect myself. But I wasn't alone for long. I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I turned, and there he was, Ethan, leaning casually in the doorway, like he had been waiting for me to notice him. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his tone a mix of teasing and accusation. "I've been hosting," I replied evenly, turning back toward the table. "It's what I do." The unwanted closeness, he didn't take the hint. Instead, he walked into the room, closing the distance between us until he was standing just a breath away. The air between us thickened, and I could smell the faint mix of wine and his cologne, too intimate for comfort. "Hosting," he said slowly, almost tasting the word. "You're always taking care of everyone else. I wonder, who takes care of you?" The question wasn't just inappropriate. It was calculated. It was the kind of thing meant to pierce right through the casual politeness we'd been maintaining all evening. I froze. "That's not a question you should be asking me." But Ethan wasn't backing off. His eyes locked on mine with a steady, unblinking intensity. The crossing of the line, then it happened. He reached out, his hand brushing against mine. Not in a passing, accidental way, but with intent. His fingers curled around mine, holding them for just a moment too long, sending a shiver of discomfort through me. Before I could pull away, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping low enough that no one else could possibly hear. "You deserve more than you're getting," he whispered. The words were so loaded I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't just an inappropriate comment. It was a challenge, a suggestion that carried implications I didn't want to entertain. And the fact that he said it here, in my home, during a family gathering, while my husband was just a room away, that's what truly shocked me. The emotional impact in that moment. A storm of feelings crashed through me. There was outrage at his audacity, his lack of respect. There was confusion, wondering if I had somehow misread the entire evening, or if this had been building toward this moment from the start. And there was a deep, hollow unease, because I knew that if my husband walked in right now, there would be no way to explain away Ethan's closeness without creating suspicion. I pulled my hand back and stepped away, my voice steady but sharp. "You're out of line." For a brief second, His confident expression faltered, but then he smirked, as if my rejection only made him more intrigued. Why it shocked me so. Deep Live had awkward interactions before. I've dealt with inappropriate comments, even unwanted flirtation. But this was different. This was my husband's best friend. Someone I trusted by association. Someone who was supposed to be loyal to us, not just him. His actions weren't just about me. They were a betrayal of my husband's trust. The setting made it worse. This wasn't some random encounter in a public space. This was in my home, in the middle of a night meant to be about family and togetherness. He wasn't just crossing a line. He was trampling over it with a kind of reckless confidence that suggested he thought he could get away with it. The struggle to stay composed, I wanted to call him out loudly, to let everyone know exactly what he had just said and done. But that would have turned the entire night into chaos. Family members taking sides, whispers spreading, relationships fracturing. My husband would have been blindsided, humiliated. So I swallowed the anger, kept my voice low, and told him to go back to the living room. Pretend this never happened, I said firmly. He tilted his head, studying me, then stepped back with a casual shrug. If that's what you want. But the smirk he gave me before walking away told me everything. He didn't think this was over. The aftermath in the moment, when I rejoined the others, I felt like I was walking on thin ice. My husband smiled at me, completely unaware. Ethan was seated across the room, laughing with one of my uncles as if nothing had happened. It was surreal. This invisible storm between us while the rest of the room carried on in blissful ignorance. Yet, the shock lingered, pulsing inside me like an unspoken secret. My mind kept replaying the moment. His hand on mine, the words he whispered, the look in his eyes. I knew two things for certain. The Ethan I thought I knew didn't exist anymore. Whatever happened next, nothing between the three of us, me, my husband, and his friend, would ever be the same again. Family gatherings were always a mix of warmth and chaos in our home. The sound of laughter spilling from the kitchen, the clinking of glasses, the faint aroma of spiced chicken roasting in the oven. It was the soundtrack of family, comfort, and tradition. These events were predictable in the best way. Relatives catching up on life, children darting through hallways, the older generation seated in clusters reminiscing about the good old days. But that night, there was someone there who didn't quite belong in that nostalgic picture. Ethan, my husband's longtime friend. Ethan wasn't family, but over the years, he had somehow woven himself into the fabric of my husband's life. They had met in college, bonded over sports and late-night parties, and remained inseparable even after marriage, careers, and responsibilities claimed their time. I had always known Ethan as the fun friend, charming, slightly reckless, and with that dangerous sort of charisma that could make anyone forgive him for almost anything. I'd met him countless times before, but something about his presence at this gathering felt different. He wasn't just dropping by for a drink or a game night. He had been invited to spend the entire evening, dinner, drinks, and dessert, with my family. At first, I didn't think much of it. My husband said Ethan had been going through some stuff lately and could use the company. And honestly, that sounded reasonable. It wasn't unusual for us to welcome friends into family events. Hospitality was practically in my blood. But there was a small, unshakable voice inside me, the kind that hums in the background, whispering that something is slightly off. The first interaction when I first saw Ethan that evening, he was standing in the living room, a glass of red wine in his hand, his posture loose but confident. His eyes found mine almost instantly, and he smiled, but it wasn't the casual, friendly smile I remembered. This one lingered, just a fraction too long, as if he was looking through me instead of at me. I brushed it off. It was just Ethan being Ethan. Always too charming. Always a little too sure of himself. But when I walked past him to check on the appetizers, his gaze followed me like heat on my back. It wasn't threatening, exactly, but it wasn't harmless either. The energy in the room changes as more guests arrived. The house grew louder, the air warmer. My husband was busy greeting his parents and cousins, and I floated between conversations, making sure everyone had enough food and drinks. But no matter where I was, it felt like Ethan was somewhere nearby, leaning against a doorway, watching me talk to an aunt, helping himself to another drink while keeping me in his peripheral vision, or simply standing across the room. Our eyes meeting unintentionally more than once. Each time it happened, there was a tiny jolt in my chest, not because I was interested in him, but because it was unsettling. He didn't look at me the way a friend should look at his best friend's wife. There was a weight in his gaze, an unspoken question, hanging between us. The subtle invasions. It's amazing how the smallest actions can feel the loudest in a crowded room. At one point, I was in the kitchen, arranging dessert plates. Ethan stepped in, ostensibly to get more wine, but instead of grabbing a bottle, he leaned on the counter next to me. "Busy night for you," he said, his voice low. "Family gatherings usually are," I replied, keeping my tone polite but distant. He didn't move away. Instead, he reached for a strawberry from the dessert platter, his fingers brushing mine lightly as if by accident. But there was nothing accidental about it. "You always do more than you should," he added, almost like it was a compliment, but with a weight behind it that made my stomach tighten. Before I could respond, my husband called from the other room, and Ethan gave me a knowing smile before strolling out as if nothing had happened. The gathering continues, and so does he. The night wore on. Dinner was served, jokes were told, wine flowed freely. To anyone else, it was a perfectly normal evening. But to me, it was an exercise in endurance. Ethan didn't cross any lines in front of others, not obviously, but he had a way of positioning himself in my space when no one was looking. He'd pour my drink before I could decline, brush against my arm when passing me the bread, or let his hand rest a beat too long on my shoulder when leaning in to share some small joke. The strangest part? No one seemed to notice. Not my husband, not my family. It was as if this strange undercurrent between Ethan and me existed in a parallel space invisible to everyone else. The glance that changed everything near the end of the night, when dessert had been eaten and people were scattered around the living room chatting in smaller groups. I looked up and caught Ethan watching me from across the room. This time, his expression wasn't playful or teasing. It was intense, almost as if he was daring me to acknowledge whatever it was that had been passing between us all evening. I felt my breath hitch. It wasn't attraction. It was something else. A creeping awareness that this man, my husband's closest friend, was about to do something that could change the course of the night. Maybe even more than that. At that moment, I knew, whatever Ethan was about to do, it wouldn't be something I could ignore. And whatever it was going to shake the safe, predictable structure of the family gathering, and my place in it. This is where part one leaves us. The stage is set, the tension is alive, and the reader feels the pull of curiosity and unease. What hasn't fully happened yet, but the groundwork is so charged that they need to know. If you want, I can now move into part two and reveal exactly what Ethan did, keeping the emotional intensity, betrayal undertones, and dramatic pacing perfect for love and lies. That's where the shock will truly land.